Did you know that most people carry some form of abandonment wound? And the story of how we carry it and why it evolved, for many of us, is different. However, healing it and the way it shows up in our life can often come across the same way. So let's explore this abandonment wound together. You know that you can start living your best life. And that's what it's all about, right? But you know what? Today we're going to be talking about the abandonment wound. And the abandonment wound is something I know myself so well. And I didn't realize why all throughout my life, yes, I'm 45 now, and I'm still single and loving life as a single woman. However, I have had numerous beautiful relationships with wonderful men who at some stage in that relationship, it got to a point where I would somehow make an excuse, make some form of drama, or push them away for some God-known reason. But it was an unknown reason until I started to research and look into the abandonment wound. And if you've listened to any of my earlier podcasts, jump back into Spiritual Profiling podcast and I'll link it to the one below. But our spiritual profiling, our emotional core wound podcast is all about how we come into this life with some core or soul wounds that we are here to learn about and overcome in this lifetime. And when we come in with a soul wound, and the soul wound of number 1, so there's 1 to 9 or 1 to 0, so there are 10 soul wounds. And these soul wounds display in our bodies or show up in our bodies. They're imprinted between the ages of sort of in utero to 9 years old. And in my belief, they're also imprinted from past lives. These are the soul lessons that we choose to come into this life to, I don't like the word heal. I like the word to understand and to integrate into our lives. Because when we have a greater understanding of what these triggers are and where they came from, we have this ability to, not only give ourselves a bit of a pat in the back and go, you know what, I signed up for this shit. It's awful. It's crap. But I signed up to resolve my tension and challenge and reaction to this type of wounding in my life, in this life. And you know what? Your soul wounds also, in my belief, and in after 25 years or more in the helping professions, I see it every day where women work through, and men work through their soul wounds, and these soul wounds actually become their gifts. I could go off on a tangent now around also your Chiron wound, which if you wanted to look at where Chiron, the planet, is in your astrological chart, what we have is the planet of Chiron is the wounded healer. He was the centaur born to a god and a sea goddess, and the sea goddess gave birth to a half man, half horse. And the reason was his father was having an affair and turned himself into a stallion so he wouldn't be found out. And so when this centaur was born, he was given up by his parents, and that led to the first of his abandonment wounds. And then he had other wounds throughout his life in the sense of healing, but he was adopted by another god who taught him how to really tap into the healing arts. And one of the first wounds he was healing was his abandonment wound from his parents. But then what happened was he was accidentally pricked in the leg with a poisoned arrow, and he couldn't heal this wound. But what happened, in my recollection of the myth, is that he then went seeking more answers and deeper healing and more understanding. And as he did, and the more he learned, he shared his gift with others, and he was never able to heal that deep abandonment wound or that wound on his leg. However, he became one of the world's greatest healers. And that was because he was learning to heal himself, but at the same time sharing his gift. And this is something that, for me, lies so deep in the reasons why I do what I do, the reasons why I share this podcast, the reasons why I like to dive into the new moon and full moon and, move with the moon in such a beautiful manifestation cycle of co-creating intentionally the life we want to live by not having to put up with or play out a role in toxic relationship patterns and in old wounds that keep coming up and showing themselves. So this old wound for me, this abandonment wound for me, showed up in my life in the way I explained, where I would have amazing love relationships and I would end up pushing them away. I would turn into a different person and push these people away. And when I started doing the work and really figuring out about these different types of soul wounds and also, dabbling into my geek love of astrology and, really, really diving deep even into the shamanic work of understanding the ripples that I hold in my body that might not even be mine. They are carried through my red thread, and how I could be expressing this abandonment wound that might not just be mine, but it could be my mum's, it could be my grandmother's, it could be my great-grandmother's. Because you see, I was an egg inside my mother's ovary I was an egg inside of my mother's belly when her mother, my grandmother, was 20 weeks pregnant with her. So we hold this imprinting, and we also, I believe, choose to come into this life with certain things that we need to learn so that we can grow and evolve and level up, connect deeper to this physical life in which our spirit is having a human experience. So my wound played out as I pushed people away, and as I discovered more and more as I kept pushing people away, was that when I was 7, my father was a fisherman and he went out to sea and he never came back. And so what I didn't realize is from that day, I had told myself unconsciously and imprinted in my brain, in my body, because from sort of in utero to 9 years old, the experiences set up these wounds within us. And I had somehow told myself that I was unlovable, that I wasn't worth it, that all men in my life will at some stage leave. And so the way that then played out in my body and in my life and in my mind was that I needed to push anyone and everyone away from my life before they got too close, before I fell so madly in love with them, which I already did. But I got to a point that I'd said to myself they were going to leave anyway. So I might as well push them away now so that I'm the one in control. It really hasn't worked out very well for me so far. However, I am working with this soul lesson and I'm able to use the skills and the tools that I have come across to not only notice when it's popping up in my life, but also to notice when it's coming up in my lives of my clients. And we have this thing where when we have, it doesn't have to be a big trauma either, like, a parent dying. It can be something as simple as being dropped off to school for the first time and mum's not walking in with me. It can be something as simple as, needing to be held and loved and nourished in a certain way that your parent may have not been aware of or incapable of. It could be because of your birth story. Your birth story might mean or might tell you that you were separated from your mother at birth, that maybe it was, a preterm birth where you were placed in an ICU or an incubator and you weren't with your mother. Maybe it was that you didn't get the years of breastfeeding that connect a child to that knowing that they are nourished and that they are loved. And if this has been your story of parenting as well, then this is not an opportunity to sit back and go, oh shit, how have I fucked up the lives of my children? Your children were born with these lessons. These are the ones, this is why I say we chose these lessons to come into this life to learn. And it's really beautiful to actually work out your soul lessons of your kids. It's also beautiful to work out their moon sign, because in astrology, if you look at where Chiron is in your chart, it's kind of like the what. It's like, where is my greatest wound? The sign is going to say how it shows up in your life. And for me, Chiron's in the second house, so it's kind of self-worth. It's very much about my inner values and my self-value. And the house that it falls in tells you where it's going to show up in your life. So let me just recap that again. The planet is the what, the sign is the how, and the house is the where. So if you wanted to jump into my Lunar Woman monthly membership, it's only 27 Australian dollars a month. It is a membership where you get to make ritual and ceremony a part of your life. And through that, you get to start working with the manifestation cycle of the moon, of our menstrual cycle. And you start to look at how you can work with each and every new and full moon, and even the phases of the moon in between, to be able to understand how those portals of energy or activations of energy show up collectively, which means show up in the world, but also show up within yourself. Because as within, so without, as above, so below. You are a beautiful golden thread in this tapestry called life, and you are important. You can continue to live your life on autopilot if you wish, but if you want to step out of raising your parents, that's quite funny. Raising your children like your mother did, even though you said you'd never do that, but yet you see yourself doing it. I know I still get that. When I'm tired, exhausted, my mum's voice comes out of my mouth. Not that she was a bad parent, but she didn't have the knowledge and tools that I have as I am parenting my daughter. So being able to step out of this and understand how our own wounds show up in our lives and the way that this abandonment wound can play out is varied in so many ways. As I said, it can come about, simply by being dropped off at grandma's house when your little child didn't want to. And you might have had potentially a divorce or, an absent parent. Maybe one of your parents was sick or had an addiction. Maybe your parents were just aloof and disconnected. Maybe there was abuse. Maybe there was lots of things that could create this abandonment wound. However, when this abandonment wound is formed, it creates this inner dialogue that says to ourselves, I'm either not lovable, I am abandoned, I'm unworthy, something must be wrong with me, the world isn't safe, I can't trust, especially in love, and I have to do everything on my own. So these wounds come up in duality. So the abandonment wound's actually a wound of, it's kind of an independence wound. So it falls into two, codependence and attention, but we'll go into that in another podcast at a different stage. But this abandonment wound really says that you may actually show up in life where you abandon yourself and start to people please others. It might also mean that you believe that others will abandon you, so again, you push them away first, which is what I did. When we are in this, we tend to be quite reactive and get triggered, especially when this wound is activated. And when this wound is activated, for me, it was in, different facial expressions or tones of voice or my own inner dialogue saying, I'm not worthy. Oh, he's looking at me funny, so obviously I've done something wrong. So then I'd fall into people pleasing, or I would disconnect completely. The other ways that the wound plays out in real life is being super, super oversensitive to criticism or feedback. Hello, put your hands up. I'm putting my hand way up because that was me for a really long time. And it's still me if I don't do the work every day. If I stop meditating, if I stop journaling, if I stop doing my daily practice, I become really oversensitive to criticism and feedback. We actually, with the abandonment wound, we overreact to conflict. And sometimes because we internalize it and make it about ourselves, because we have self-doubt and insecurity and lack of self-worth. And sometimes in the abandonment wound, even if we dream about ending a relationship, sometimes this wasn't me, because usually I would end the relationship before it was needing to be ended. But sometimes it might play out that you actually stay in a deeply abusive relationship for the fear of being abandoned again. It gives, this extremist kind of tendencies of feeling anxious or fear that other people are going to leave you. It feels like we could even push people away or ghost them if there's a first sign of conflict. We can have extreme outbursts. And I love this. I'm saying we because this is me down to a T. I have I'm a 3611, which makes me a 2. And I was, 2 is a huge part of my abandonment wound as well, which is the codependence and attention. But this number 1 wound, it's double in mine. It's an 11. And so in this isn't numerology, this is spiritual profiling numbers. And in that, there's what am I trying to say? It's like we have this tendency to either want to bring people in and attract them to ourselves so that we're looking outside of ourselves for people to increase our self-worth and give us that attention and acknowledgement and love, because we're not giving it enough to ourselves. We have to start becoming comfortable with our own values, our own visions, and our own goals, because we can have a tendency to put our own dreams and values aside just to fit in, because we're so worried that we'll be ostracized or outed or whatever word you want to put in there. We often can get sort of, what's the word? Disconnect. We disconnect from people because we're afraid. We have this deep subconscious pattern that it's not safe to trust. It's not safe to be close. It's not safe to be loved because we're going to be abandoned. And so that makes our world unsafe. That makes our base chakra so unbalanced, like standing on a wobble board instead of standing on, a really healthy, grounded foundation upon which to stand. And again, if you want to explore base chakra blocks and really get into the embodiment of what it means to stand on a really healthy foundation, if you have money issues, if you have trust issues, if you have, self-worth issues, jump into the base chakra codes activation, which is part of our Awaken and Rise programs. But if you wanted to just jump in and experience what it's like, it's only $47 or something like that, Australian dollars. So if you're listening in America, that's crazy cheap. Jump in and see what it's like to work with me in a self-paced online journey that takes you through a week, or you can binge it in a weekend, through journaling, through teachings, through daily devotion, to be able to feel into where have you let go of your safety and security? What are you doing in your own life that might be fueling or feeding this abandonment wound? And how you can actually use day-to-day practices, or daily devotions as I like to call them, to be able to come into awareness of or partnership with this wound, so you identify it when it starts to play out in your life. Because this wound has us feeling, obviously abandoned, disempowered, unheard, invisible, rejected, isolated, restricted, hardened even, We can become opinionated and superior, or even feel like we're ignored or unseen. This wound is huge. And so if you have the soul number of 1, if you know that you have an abandonment wound, then start to work with it. Start to try and journal around, where did I let go of my safety and security? Jump into the base chakra code activation and play with what is causing the stress in your life, what is causing you to live on autopilot. What is all that deep unconscious programming that's standing in the way of you stepping into your true and authentic self. All those links for those that I have recommended will be below. But remember, with this lesson of abandonment, we need to really understand that our tendency is to abandon ourselves and definitely to abandon others before they abandon you. And so a beautiful I am statement. I love I am statements. I am statements come to help us realize that we are in control of how our emotions play out in our lives. One could be, I'm giving and receiving, or I am worthy of receiving love. I am worthy of happiness. Because the abandonment wound is worth orientated. It is, I am owning my life and my happiness comes from within. There is so many beautiful I am statements that we can use or work with to bring this lesson into balance. I am achieving balance, loving, abundant life through self-validation and connection with others. This is my favorite. I am confident and self-assured. I am worthy of connection. And I believe I can stand in my personal power with acceptance and grace. And with that, sister, that is today's podcast coming to an end. I hope that this hasn't triggered a deep wound within you, but has helped you to know that there are ways of working with these wounds that will help you to truly make this abandonment wound your superpower, so that you can become more trusting and receiving of love. And then you get to know what healthy healthy love looks like. But we have to acknowledge that there has been a past hurt. Whether you know what that past hurt is or isn't, it doesn't matter. But just acknowledge that there was some form of abandonment. We then need to feel our feelings. Because if we don't feel, we cannot heal. You have to remember that you're not the only one in this life going through this wound. And you are not alone. You are not broken. You do not need to be fixed. But sitting in Sacred Women's Circle like we do in Rise, which is, it's a combination of all of the chakra codes from base chakra to crown chakra, where you get lifetime access to the chakra codes, but you also get to sit in weekly women's circle every single week for 12 weeks to work through what is coming up for you during those, modules, and also, the opportunity to get love seat coaching from myself or one of our head coaches here. And it also gives you an ability to truly sit in and heal the abandonment wound, because you get to belong to a sisterhood and let love in. Because the abandonment wound is about really not letting love in. It's being fearful of being betrayed or worse, abandoned. So it helps you there to let love in. So I'll link Rise below as well. If you're not ready for Rise is stupidly cheap as well. I went through, because of this abandonment wound, I've had years of financial hardship. And when I was going through that financial hardship, I desperately needed help. And I found it impossible to work with a lot of coaches and with a lot of, community groups and things like that, because the fee was outside of what was possible for me. So one of the things that I'm doing is making a lot of my programs really accessible, where there might be a payment plan, there's scholarships available, and the bottom line is also that they're really, really affordable to begin with, because I want to, my mission is to help and support as many women as I can to step out of living in unconscious conditioning and start instead living from their core. It's being able to live from your soul and not your circumstances, because our circumstances can be changed with conscious, intentional living, especially when done in sisterhood. I love you, sister, and I'll see you when I see you, where I see you, and bye for now.